Would anyone like to ask either of our speakers? There's a gentleman that's very keen right up the back there. Microphone? It's just coming.
G'day, can you hear me? Oh yes. Both of you mentioned somebody called the customer, right? The most popular person on this planet, according to Twitter, is a man called Sir Richard Branson. And after 47 years in business, he just wrote a book called The Virgin Way. And in that, he dedicates a whole chapter to something called the dying art of listening. I would say this is not good news for the customer. So my question is, why do you think he wrote that chapter?
Ross, that sounds like one of us.
I don't know. He's a very successful person, obviously, and I had the pleasure of meeting him some years ago when he was in Brisbane. But for various reasons, I don't think either of us remember much about that conversation. But you have to admire his drive and enthusiasm and his fortitude, and the way he runs his businesses are completely different from what I've seen to the way businesses are traditionally run. And he is a guy who seizes opportunity and moves very quickly. Moves very, very quickly. And I don't know how much focus he puts on. One of the problems with asking customers what they want is they very often don't know. They very often, particularly when it comes to technological solutions, can't envisage what it is that could be possible. And we find that all the time. When we do our market research about our apps, the take-up rate that the market research finds is always quite low, but when you make the app available, the take-up rate is always massive, because people find it hard to obviously understand what it is that could be offered and how usable it might be. I haven't read the book, but I'm going on holidays on the 13th of December, and it's just gone onto my list. Because I've download. Yeah, so digital. Of course, I should do that. I should move into the modern world. So I'll download it, and maybe if you give me your card, I'll send you an email and let you know what I think. But look, we're much more focused on the customer, but understanding that the customer can't, particularly in IT, can't necessarily envisage what it is that we could offer. But we need to listen to what they've got to say, but also be adventurous, and try really different ways of delivering for them, and be prepared to fail.
I think, Sean, you want to make a comment?
See if this works as well. My take on things in terms of why he would have written that chapter is, I think we live in a world where we've got instant answers for everything, and the greatest barrier to listening is the assumption that you've got all the answers. So we certainly see it, especially in our space as well. If you've got a question, I've got 2 young kids, and they ask me a question, and 9 times out of 10, I don't have the answer, but I'll go, yeah, I've got the answer, Google it. And I think that's probably the reason why we've stopped listening, because we just assume that we're right, we've got the answers, and I think that's one of the greatest barriers to innovating, is the assumption that you've already solved the problem. And I think I guess we see it across science in general. We found at the start of the Big Bang, oops, it's dust. There's just this general assumption that we have the answers to everything. So that would be my take on why he wrote the chapter.
Thanks, Sean. As long as your answer isn't, it's to keep the rabbits out. So, this gentleman over here.
Morning. Bill Owens, Veracity Business Solution. I've got a question for Sean. Ross talked about partnerships, and SEQ Water is clearly committed to cost reduction. What are the main drivers to retaining ICT services in-house rather than outsourcing?
I would say probably the primary one for us, and we've gone through some high-level benchmarking exercise for some of the services. So if we look at things like storage, data centres, the reality is we have almost a level of critical mass that allows us to be fairly competitive. And within that, and again, I'm not preempting any further conversation, the question is, where do you start with contestable services? Do you take the whole chunk? We've got two massive investments in data centers and a fair share of infrastructure that's already in that space. So when we start talking about cloud services, or we look at services outside of those traditional two data centers, the cost of comms now becomes a competitive disadvantage for that vendor pitching for business. So one of the things we have looked at is, can we leverage partnerships with our current infrastructure that's in place, so that we don't re-incur the cost of comms. So for example, we've got 10 gig links between ourselves and the data centers. For any other vendor providing services directly into our head office, you would incur that additional comms cost, and that immediately puts you at a disadvantage. So talk about innovating, there might not only be a partnership opportunity between us and industry, it might be between industry and industry to find a better way of delivering those services. But right now for us, every service we move out of a traditional data center environment into the cloud means an additional communications cost for us to back all that information. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah,
in part, no. Oops.
Okay. Next questions.
Hi, Sean. Jim from Scan Conversion Services. It looks like you're in the firing line this morning. My question's about litigation and RCT's contribution to, I suppose, avoiding as much litigation as possible. Does RCT have a specific target to reduce litigation? Unfortunately, your industry is fraught with litigation, and we know that there's a massive lawsuit on the go at the moment. But what is your contribution to reducing litigation? And then what mechanisms within RCT need to be turned on to try and reduce your litigation?
It's a great question. It's a bit of a loaded grenade. I think, so if I start at the beginning, what's our contribution? So it's fairly significant. So being custodians of records management, and under the delegations manual, the ICT function is accountable for IS40 compliance. There is obviously a definite need for us to ensure that the information we hold is held securely and appropriately managed as an information asset. So that obviously encompasses systems. As you alluded to, we do have a class action on the go at the moment, which is, I guess, one of the largest in Australian history, as I understand. So our role, I guess, is to ensure that information that is stored is appropriately stored, maintained, disposed of in accordance with the Act. Outside of litigation, I guess it's such a broad conversation that we could be having around litigation. In essence, the information that we store is owned by the public, as far as I'm concerned. If there's any information you generally wanted to get from SecWater, a Freedom of Information request would, I guess, allow you access to that information, apart from commercial and confidence information relating to contractual information or payroll information, that sort of stuff. We serve the public. So I guess really the measures we have in place to ensure that we are not exposing the organisation to any undue risk is obviously appropriate management of information through correct systems and processes that are compliant with our obligations. Does that answer?
Time for just a couple more questions. Anyone with a question I'd like to ask? This lady down here. Yep.
Good morning. My name's Christina Dean. I have a company called Uniforte, and we specialise in change management. I'm interested to see that you have two elements up there this morning. Mr. Musgrave, this is for you. That you have two elements in your value system there this morning, and one is about customer service, and the other one is about enabling people or empowering people. I'm just wondering, one of the most important things that the ICT industry sees is that customers often do not take, customers as in government in this instance, do not take accountability and responsibility for managing change inside their organisations. This adds enormous costs to the costs of ICT when customers are resistant to their own changes. And I'm wondering whether or not you're putting some internal customer relationships in place in this cultural reform that you're having, where where we do see actually that the government does take responsibility for its own change, rather than feeling the resistance of it all the time.
You're absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. We have been, and in places we still are. It's why I've changed my thinking substantially, because I've seen that we haven't achieved what we should have achieved, and I've been asking the question why. It's why I met with the CIOs, all the government CIOs recently, to try and better understand what the barriers might be to allowing this innovation, and for them to hear from me what the whole of government direction is to reinforce that. And I expect to see big change. I unashamedly expect to see big change. And I'm happy to give you my card. If you don't see it over the next year, I want you to get back onto me and let me know where your problems are. But we are, we're undergoing the biggest change program in Australia's history in this government at the moment, in Queensland. We need to. Government service delivery was broken almost everywhere. And we've done like 25% of what we need to do, probably, that we can see now, and it'd be like painting the Sydney Harbour Bridge. By the time we get to the end of that, there'll be another lot to do. But we're 25% of the way through, and we're butting up against brick walls which is the lack of ICT reform. That just can't happen. I'll do whatever I can to move that forward, and I'm a pretty persuasive person.
Time for one more question, maybe. Anyone? This gentleman down the front here. I might just bring in a microphone for the purpose of the video. Yep. Might be a minute.
Paul Dunn, Exclaim IT. A question for Ross. How does viewing things from the customer's perspective change government IT spending priorities? And what do you think the biggest opportunity for vendors to help you will be?
Well, it changes our priorities very significantly because we have been looking at things, I guess, from, as I said earlier, I think, from the perspective of the system. So we say, we've got a legacy system here that needs to be replaced. Right, let's go and find a system. In fact, actually, usually what we do is we say, let's build another one, which is I'm not a fan of. But without actually fundamentally questioning, is this system actually what the customers want? Is it delivering what they need in the future? Will it deliver what they need in the future? And we haven't been asking that question anywhere near well enough. I'm perplexed, and I don't pretend to have the answers to all of this. But I'm perplexed as to... we run a similar business to every state government or, regional government in the world. They're all doing the same thing, pretty much, certainly in the Western world. We run a health system, we run a transport system, a policing system, all the same stuff. I don't understand why we have to build from scratch ICT systems. And we have a history of doing that. And I don't get it, and maybe there's something that I'm missing. But we need to, before we jump to the answer, start with what is it that we need to deliver in the future, instead of just assuming we've got to replace the legacy system that we've got now, that is usually broken, because most of them are, or they're about to fall over. Instead of just saying, we need to find a replacement for that, we need to ask the fundamental question, what is it that we need to, and look at that from the customer's perspective.
Thanks very much, Ross. Look, I'm aware that Ross needs to get to another commitment at this stage. So what I'd like to do is just call a halt to the Q&A session now. There's time to meet a number of Sean and Ross's colleagues outside if you'd like to have a more detailed conversation. Or Ross is a very approachable guy, as is Sean, I'm sure.
Can I just?
Yes,
can I just? I want to give you. I want to plug something, unashamedly plug something that's going on in Brisbane at the moment. You all know about G20. And it's a huge opportunity for this city and for this state. And I don't think people really understand what a huge opportunity this is. But as people who live here, there's another huge opportunity called the G20 Cultural Program. And I saw something amazing the other night. I have no life, so I was coming out of work on Sunday night, and I saw these people walking down the streets dressed in costumes with lights. And so I followed them, and I found in Queen's Park, just off George Street, this amazing technological sort of light show that kind of makes the casino building collapse and then rebuild. And then I followed them down to Parliament House, and there's a similar sort of amazing light show down there. If you've got kids, or even if you haven't, you've got to go out and see this, because I've never seen anything like this in Brisbane before. And it's a great, there's much more than that going on, but they're the things that I just happened to bump into. You have got to go and see this. Even, I don't know how they do it technologically, but it looks amazing. And please take advantage of this great 3 weeks where that's going on in Brisbane. So, play a part in G22 if you can.
Actually, that's a good point, Ross. As you many would know, Brisbane is hosting a global cafe on the Tuesday and Wednesday. I really would encourage you to support. There's particularly a digital event from 7:30 to 11:30 on the Wednesday night. If you haven't looked at it, I really encourage you to look at it and participate if you can, because it's a great opportunity to network with some really international leaders that are going to be here during that period of time, and obviously, you know, various entourages, I suppose, with the world leaders as well. So if you haven't, have a serious look at it and participate if you can. So what I'd like to do now is I'd just like to wrap up this morning. I'm sure you agree with me, having someone like Ross to come along and give us a big picture. Ross is right at the centre of government in Queensland. I think some of his messages were really pertinent for you to have the conversations that you're having with CIOs and program leaders in government. So we really appreciate, Ross, your time and attention to us this morning. And Sean, I thought, gave an excellent overview of a major government enterprise and the reform that was happening at the, where the rubber hits the road. Obviously, opportunities are opening up in his business as it is in other government-owned enterprises in Queensland over the next, 1, 2, 3 or 4 years. So really pleased to have Sean along this morning in the support of SEQ Water. So please join me in thanking both of them. Just a quick wrap up. We will ask you to give us a bit of a customer survey feedback on this morning. Very important. These are measures that we treat very, very importantly. By way of your knowledge, 97% overall satisfaction with PIT events on the basis of your feedback to date. So really appreciate your support for that ongoing. I'd like to thank my team for organising this morning and for The Edge for providing us an excellent venue and audio-visual facility. So let's convene outside for a cuppa and a little bit of networking. Thanks, everyone.